So let's jump right in. We're looking at three of the most famous parables you've probably ever heard. But what if I told you they aren't actually three separate stories at all? The thinking here, coming from Dr. Daniel Darko, is that these stories are really one single powerful argument, a three-part defense against a pretty serious accusation.
To really get the defense, first we have to understand the supposed crime. The whole thing kicks off with Jesus having a meal. But, it's his choice of dinner guests that's causing a huge stir and leading to some very public criticism from the religious authorities.
And there it is, the big charge laid out by the Pharisees and scribes. Now, it might sound simple to us, but this was a deeply serious accusation at the time. It's the spark that ignites this entire chapter.
So why was this such a big deal? Well, in that culture, sharing a meal wasn't just about food. It was a huge deal. It signified acceptance, honor, real fellowship. So for Jesus to be dining with people who were labeled sinners, tax collectors, and the like, was seen as a massive social and religious no-no. He wasn't just eating with them, he was publicly honoring them.
Now, instead of just arguing back, Jesus does something brilliant. He responds with a series of three stories. Our source frames these as his carefully constructed, three-part answer to his critics. So he's not just telling tales, he's methodically building his case.
And here's where the structure gets really cool, as Dr. Darko points out. Every single one of these stories follows the exact same pattern. First, something valuable gets lost. Second, someone searches for it, and it's found. And third, what happens immediately after? A huge celebration. You got to keep this pattern in mind as we go through them.
All right, let's get into the first part of his defense. Jesus kicks things off with the story of a lost sheep. And believe me, his choice of a hero for this story is completely intentional.
Get this, the protagonist is a shepherd. Now, to the religious elite listening, shepherds were a low-status, kind of despised group. So right out of the gate, Jesus is already poking at his critics' social hierarchy. He's making a shepherd the hero who actually understands what's truly valuable.
Now, the logic here seems pretty risky, right? Leave 99 sheep to go find just one. But the source makes it clear that culturally shepherds worked together, so the other 99 were perfectly safe. The real point is the shepherd's personal, passionate search for that one lost sheep. And when he finds it, he doesn't scold it. He throws it on his shoulders and calls all his friends to celebrate. The message is clear. Finding the lost is a reason for wild joy, not for judgment.
So, immediately after the first story, Jesus launches into the second one. And once again, he chooses a main character that would have been a real surprise, and maybe even a little offensive to his audience. First a shepherd, now a woman. In a society where a woman's testimony held almost no legal weight, Jesus again flips the script. He puts a woman at the very center of his teaching, using her actions to teach these learned men a lesson about what God truly values.
So, a woman loses one of her 10 silver coins. This wasn't just spare change. It was likely part of her dowry, something incredibly valuable to her. She lights a lamp, sweeps her entire house, and searches like crazy until she finds it. But here, Jesus adds a totally new layer to his argument. The celebration, he says, is over one sinner who repents. He's hinting to his critics that the very sinners they're so busy judging have already had a change of heart.
And that brings us to the grand finale, the climax of his three-part defense. It's a story many of us think we know, but our source invites us to see it from a completely different and, honestly, much more powerful angle.
Yeah, most of us grew up calling this story the parable of the prodigal son. The focus is all on the younger son's wasteful or prodigal behavior.
But Dr. Darko argues that this title totally misses the point Jesus is making. See, labeling the son prodigal is exactly the kind of judging his critics would do. Jesus' focus isn't on the son's screw-ups, it's on the fact that he was lost and has now been found. It fits the pattern perfectly.
And man, this son's fall from grace is just catastrophic. Asking for his inheritance early was basically like telling his dad, "I wish you were dead." Then he blows it all and ends up feeding pigs, which for a Jewish man is about as rock bottom as you can get. The critics listening would have been nodding along, thinking, yep, that's what sinners do. But then the son repents. He comes to himself and starts the long walk home, ready to beg just to be a servant. And the father's reaction here, it's just incredible. It shows you the whole heart of the story. The father, representing God, doesn't wait. He sees his son way off in the distance and runs, something a respected patriarch would never, ever do. And every single action is just dripping with meaning. The best robe, that restores his honor. The ring, that reinstates his authority in the family. The shoes, that proves he's a son, not a slave. And then, right on cue with the pattern, he calls for a massive party.
And here it is, the punchline that ties all three stories together. This is the thesis of Jesus' entire argument. The reason for the party, the reason for eating with sinners, is because what everyone considered dead and lost is now alive and found.
But hold on, the story isn't over. Just when we think everything is resolved, Jesus pivots to the second half of the parable. And it's here we realize the younger son was never the main character. The real target of the story is someone else entirely.
This is the key that unlocks the whole thing. The grumbling of the religious leaders back at the beginning of the chapter is a perfect mirror image of the grumbling of the elder brother here at the end. Both are standing outside the party, angry and self-righteous. Both believe their good behavior means they deserve special treatment. Jesus is literally holding up a mirror to his critics, and the reflection they see is the elder brother.
And just listen to his language. The resentment is so deep that the elder brother can't even bring himself to call him my brother. He spits out the words to his father, "When this son of yours came home." It's a complete rejection of family, the very thing the father is so desperately trying to restore.
And this is the absolute genius of the ending. The parable is left unfinished. The father pleads with his older son, saying, "We had to celebrate because this, your brother, was dead and is alive." But we never find out if he goes inside. And that's the final provocative question Jesus just leaves hanging in the air for his critics and for us. Will you stay outside judging, or will you join the celebration for the lost being found?